In this first lesson for the class Animal Agriculture and the Environment, we're going to discuss nitrogen and phosphorus, their roles as both nutrients and pollutants. First, I'll say something that may be self-evident to you, but it's something I think is important to start with, whether it's with an agricultural audience or a non-agricultural audience, and that is to recognize just how big an impact agricultural productivity has had on our country's economy and lifestyle. If agricultural practices had remained the same as they were 50 and 100 years ago, the United States would not enjoy its current standard of living. In the United States, we spend about 10% of our income on food, and that is by far the lowest in any country in the world. And that's because of the tremendous increase in efficiency in agricultural productivity, especially in the last 80 years. However, this increase in efficiency has been associated with a variety of environmental problems, and our challenge is to continue to progress while avoiding and alleviating these negative effects. Much of the increase in agricultural productivity and efficiency is due to specialization on farms, with farmers focusing on producing one or only a few products. This specialization relies on importing to the farm inputs like feed or fertilizer. This is in contrast to the self-sufficiency our grandparents' more diversified farms might have enjoyed. Self-sufficiency is the trade-off for specialization and its increased efficiency. As an example, livestock farms, whether beef or dairy or poultry or swine, rarely produce all of the feed the herd or flock needs. So, a specialized broiler farm in Virginia, for instance, may be importing grains from the corn and wheat belt and mineral supplements from the phosphorus mines in South Florida. We use these grains to feed the birds and export the meat they produce to markets around the world. But the majority of the feed nutrients are actually excreted by the birds. And these excretions, litter if it's a poultry farm, manure if a dairy or beef farm, stay in the area and are land applied as fertilizer. Over time, then, we're concentrating nutrients in areas of intensive animal agriculture. Staying with the Virginia example, some of the most productive farms in the state are located within the Chesapeake Bay watershed. The watershed is the land base that drains to the Chesapeake Bay, and it stretches all the way from Cooperstown, New York, down to the middle of Virginia. The state's livestock industry is historically concentrated in the Shenandoah Valley within that bay watershed. That industry is an important contributor to the local economy. Like most areas of intensive animal agriculture, however, more manure is produced in the valley than can be utilized by crops grown there. In this presentation, I'll cover 3 ways in which nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus, may be environmental pollutants. Manure or fertilizer nitrogen application in excess of crop needs can lead to leaching of nitrate to groundwater. This map shows areas of the United States where nitrate leaching has contaminated groundwater. I'll talk about this more in the next lesson, but suffice it to say that many of these areas in red are areas of intensive animal agriculture. Much of the U.S. relies on groundwater for drinking water, and when nitrate concentration in drinking water is elevated, it can cause a health problem called methemoglobinemia. Methemoglobinemia. Methemoglobinemia, say that 3 times. This is an impairment of the ability of hemoglobin to transport oxygen to the peripheral tissues. The problem is that nitrate, converted to nitrite in the body, competes with oxygen for binding sites on hemoglobin. That is, it literally displaces the oxygen that hemoglobin would normally carry to the tissues. Nitrate binding to hemoglobin results in reduced oxygen supply. Another name for methemoglobinemia is blue baby syndrome, and the reduced oxygen supply leads quite literally to a pale or bluish skin tone. Now, it's easily reversed by providing supplemental oxygen, but it's obviously frightening, and babies are more susceptible to this than adults. for a couple of reasons. One has to do with the pH within their digestive tract. The other is because they have low activity of an enzyme that prevents the accumulation of this methemoglobin. So leaching of nitrogen in the form of nitrate to groundwater is the first of the three primary ways that nutrients can be pollutants. A second is via runoff. If nitrogen or phosphorus are overapplied, that is, applied to the land in excess of crop requirements, or at a time that the crops can't utilize those nutrients, then nitrogen or phosphorus may run off and contaminate surface water. Here's a likely quiz question for you. What is surface water? Think for a minute. Surface water is simply a body of water on the surface of the earth. So streams, lakes, the Chesapeake Bay. Groundwater, in contrast, is, yep, you got it, water beneath the surface of the earth. Here's a likely quiz question for you. What is surface water? Think for a minute. Surface water is simply a body of water on the surface of the earth. So streams, lakes, the Chesapeake Bay. Groundwater, in contrast, is, yep, you got it, water beneath the surface of the earth. Nitrogen or phosphorus contamination of surface water can cause eutrophication. Eutrophication, say that 3 times. Eutrophication is the overgrowth of algae in a body of surface water. When that algae dies, its degradation sucks the oxygen out of the water, and that impairs the growth of, well, anything living in the water. Another term for eutrophication is an algae bloom, and the impact of the resulting low dissolved oxygen in water is termed a fish kill. As mentioned, this overgrowth of algae may be triggered by excess nitrogen or phosphorus. Which nutrient is the cause depends on which is the limiting nutrient in that body of surface water. Typically, nitrogen is the limiting nutrient in salt water, meaning that it is a lack of nitrogen that limits algae growth. Therefore, when nitrogen runs off the land and contaminates bodies of salt water, that limit is relieved and the algae grows or blooms. In fresh water, it's usually phosphorus that is the limiting nutrient. In the photo on the left, scientists divided a freshwater lake and added phosphorus to one side of the divide. The green color you see is the resulting algae bloom. Bodies of water with low dissolved oxygen are referred to as hypoxic zones or dead zones because few aquatic species can survive. Every year, bodies of water around the world develop dead zones as a result of nutrient pollution. In the Gulf of Mexico, for example, a dead zone the size of the state of New Jersey recurs each year. So nitrogen can contaminate groundwater by leaching. Nitrogen and phosphorus can contaminate surface water via runoff. The third major way that these nutrients become pollutants is through volatilization. Nitrogen can volatilize as ammonia, causing a variety of environmental and health problems. In the air, ammonia reacts with nitric acid or sulfuric acid and forms small particulates. These particles travel with the wind, and they return to land in rainfall. Thus, nitrogen that volatilizes from one region can cause eutrophication in someplace entirely different. These maps of ammonia emission on the left and ammonia deposition on the right demonstrate that geographic disparity. In general, the areas where ammonia is deposited are to the east of where they are emitted. Consider this. If you were setting policy to limit ammonia emissions, at what level would you regulate? Most environmental regulations are set at the local or state level. But if the impact of ammonia emission isn't local, well, you can see the challenge. I remember several years ago sitting down with a friend of mine who helped to set policy and research direction at the USDA. He told me to stop working on phosphorus and start working on ammonia emissions. So we talked for a while about emissions, challenge of the feedlots in the panhandle of Texas, for instance, contributing to eutrophication 2 states to the east, I asked him how far ammonia-containing particles can travel. His reply stuck with me. He said, "How far can the wind blow?" As mentioned, in the air, ammonia reacts with nitric acid or sulfuric acid to form small particles. These are called secondary particulates. Secondary in contrast, for instance, to dust, which is a primary particulate. These particulates are also defined by their size. Secondary particulates that are smaller than 10 microns are referred to as PM10, and those even smaller, less than 2.5 microns, are referred to as PM2.5. These fine particulates, PM2.5, are the primary cause of smog. PM10, which remember is inclusive, any particulates less than 10 microns, has been linked to serious health impacts because they can be inhaled deep into the lungs. Scientists have linked elevated PM10 with premature death in people with heart or lung disease, aggravated asthma, and irritation of the airways or coughing or difficulty breathing. Going back to that conversation with my friend from the USDA, the other thing he said that day that stuck with me was that concerns associated with ammonia emission could kill animal agriculture. Wow. That was a pretty strong statement from somebody who was trained as an animal scientist and was considered a friend to production agriculture. So why did he say that? He said that because animal agriculture is the dominant source of ammonia emissions in the United States. Estimates of the proportion of total ammonia emissions that are from agriculture as a whole are greater than 90%. Within that, about 2/3 is from animal agriculture. A lot to think about in this lesson. Nitrogen and phosphorus are required nutrients for growth and maintenance of animals and most plants, but they can pollute water and air resources through leaching, nitrogen, runoff, nitrogen and phosphorus, and volatilization, nitrogen. In future lessons, we'll focus on potential solutions to the environmental challenges associated with animal agriculture.